Hi friends, quick demo on some advanced selection techniques today in Photoshop. So I'm going to open up the prompt image. It should be a picture of a little hairless dog, which you can download from our Google Classroom assignment. I have it saved to my desktop, so I'm going there to find it. Here he is. And this is a great example to work with because it's relatively high quality. I mean, it's not the best resolution, but at least the edge is somewhat clear. And the background is plain, and the lighting on the dog makes the hairs stand out. If you had a really busy background, this would be much harder. So we're going to work with this and just know that every image is going to be different. And depending on the quality of your image, the lighting, and the background, you may or may not be able to make a high quality selection using these same tools. And that's why it's so important to set up your shot properly from the get-go if you are planning on taking a photo to use in photo manipulation later. So for this image, we're going to start with just a basic tool. I'm going to use the quick selection tool, or you can use the object selection tool. But we just want to start by making a basic selection around the dog. It doesn't have to be perfect because that's what we're going to learn how to do soon. So there's our results with the quick selection tool. Just to see, we can try the object selection tool instead. See what kind of a job it does. It's thinking because it's obviously a pretty complex selection around the edge. So as you can see, the results aren't really much better with the object selection tool on the quick selection tool. That's why it's important to know these advanced techniques and a bunch of different tools as well. I'm going to go back to my first selection that I made with the quick selection tool, just because it has a little bit less of the background in there. So for this next piece, I'm going to go up to select in the top bar here. And here's the kicker. You can't just select the object that we're going to use. You actually have to hold Shift on your keyboard and then click this option, Select and Mask. It brings you to kind of a different view of the tool. Now you can experiment with the regular Refine Edge, but this is the one that I've kind of learned and gotten used to. So when you hold Shift and click Refine Edge, it brings up this panel. And there's a couple settings I usually use. You're welcome to experiment to see your results, but under edge detection, I check smart radius, and then I add a radius of just 1 pixel. Again, you can experiment with these. But what's cool is that you will generally have your brush tool when you're in this mode, and you can come over and start to paint along the edges wherever there's hair. And when I let go after getting a chunk in there, watch what happens. It looks through that area with the smart radius around where your brush tool painted, and it tries to pick up on what's part of the background versus what's part of your selection. And again, that's easy enough in this example because the background and the hair, there's a lot of contrast there. If the dog's hair were dark or the background were light, this would not work as well. But that's why it's important to have a good image going in. There may be some parts of the background color that are still kind of showing through, so just do your best. You don't want to paint too far inside the dog because then it's going to get confused again what's background and what's part of the image that you actually want. But the key with this technique is just to go along wherever you see hair and paint it in so that the computer can look through that area and determine what's part of the background and what is part of the dog. So again, there's some parts of the background showing through. I'm just going in and painting in those areas to hopefully have the computer kind of look again and realize that that's not part of my selection, it's part of the background. So it's doing a pretty darn good job. Even along the edge of the skin, it's picking up on all those little hairs. So that looks pretty good for what we started with. You're welcome to experiment with some of these other settings too and see what they do. So I'm not getting great results when I bump these up, but again, for different images, these might work really well. So feather kind of feathers the background into your selection, so it's a little smoother along the edges. I don't want that because the background is dark, and if I'm putting the dog on a light background, I don't want any of the background to be feathered in. You can bump up the contrast along the edge of your selection, but for me here, that starts to just make it look a little more low quality. Shift edge is kind of cool for certain selections. you can either shift the edge out, so where my selection was, it adds pixels onto the edge of that, or you can shift the selection in, and that kind of cuts into the line of your selection. So there's certain times where that might be helpful. Here, I'm just going to kind of leave it as is, but it's helpful for you to know what that does. Decontaminate colors doesn't look like it does a whole lot here, but sometimes if there's some like color cast to your selection, that can help to deal with those colors. So let's see if this gives us any different results. You can see it kind of changing the color when I change the percentage of the decontamination of the colors there. So this is important to look at. The output too. We may or may not have talked about layer masks yet, depending on where we're at. You can either output what you have selected onto a new layer. It's on its own, into a new document with a layer mask, any of these things. It doesn't look like it's letting me choose just a selection. So I'm going to do new layer for now. And I'm going to click OK. So that's new. It used to let you just make that a selection. So you can see I have one version of the dog without the background, one version of him in the background. So if this isn't what you want, and if you do want to use a layer mask, or when we get to that point, you can always make a selection from a layer that's been cut out by holding Control. So if I hold Control on my keyboard, you see I get this little, what looks like the marquee, rectangular marquee tool. If I hold down Control and then I click on the layer thumbnail, it makes that my selection. So what I could do is come over here to the layer with the dog on it, and then you can see I get the same results. So that's how you can use a cutout layer to make your selection. Again, is holding Control, clicking the thumbnail, and your selection becomes active. From here, you can add a new background behind the dog, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. If you want to bring in a new image layer behind him, you can for fun, but I would just say have a blank color layer behind him. How I did that, just the short version of it, because we'll get more into this in the future. Click the little half circle at the bottom of your layers panel, go to solid color, change it to white, and make sure that layer is behind the dog. And that should allow me to see the edge of your little creature.